You can start in the room if that's helpful, and then get to the phone.
Yep, that'd be great.
Okay.
Sean Scully, Washington Gas.
Teresa Lawrence, DOEE.
Good morning, I'm Ted Treyview with the DC Sustainable Energy Utility.
Good morning, Terry Hinton with Public Service Commission.
Laura Vendetta with Grid Alternatives.
Good morning, Hussein Karim, Assistant General Counsel, DOE.
Angela Johnson.
Glenn Burdick, DCSU.
Patty Boyd, DCSU.
Mike Matthews, DOEE. And Al Sullivan, DOEE. Mark Nielsen, DOEE.
Okay, that's everyone in the room and on the phone. I know it will be difficult, so we don't talk at once, but we'll try.
Sandra Matabu Fry.
Johan
Crystal McDonald, DCSU. Donna Cooper.
Busher Graves, Clean Choice Energy.
Adrian Henderson, DCOPC. Great, and you've got Millie Knowlton as well.
And
Vicki Corman signing in downstairs.
Okay.
Having fun.
Okay, we've made a note of everyone on the sign-in sheet, so Millie can take it away.
Yeah, great. I think the next step is to approve the agenda. Are there any comments or additions to the agenda? Great. Would someone like to move to approve the agenda?
Also move, Terry.
I'll second, Laura.
All in favor?
Aye.
Are you all? Any
Any
opposed?
Yes, she's on the way.
Hey. Hi, can you? Sorry, what's that, Vicki? Any opposed to approving the agenda?
Yep.
All right, agenda is approved. I think that the next item is reviewing and adopting the minutes from June 9th. I'll give everyone a few minutes to read through those. Just to confirm, the agenda says June 9th, but the minutes themselves say June 11th. I think the date on the agenda needs to be fixed, but it appears correct on the minutes themselves.
Yeah, we must have made that the June 9th minutes? Yes.
June 11th.
Oh, June 11th, yes, that's correct. Thank you.
It sounds like the chairman may have just entered the room. Is that right?
Let the record reflect.
Yes, it's a great fanfare. I will point out.
I didn't hear any
You just
bugles.
couldn't hear
Yeah,
it.
I didn't hear it. But
Great silent
Thank you. Yeah, little God save the Queen. Yeah. I have a question on the minutes, but I don't know where you all are.
That's what we're waiting for.
Oh, thank you. Okay, on page 2, the annual target, there's, all of them say minimum and maximum achieved or not achieved, but it doesn't on the first one, improve energy efficiency of low-income properties. And I was wondering if there was something that was just missed by accident.
I don't, factually, that was a target where the minimum was achieved and the maximum was missed by about 4%.
Which is-
Yeah, the second line says, is continuation on the second line.
Oh, the hyphen is, okay.
There shouldn't be a hyphen on the
I
second
see,
line.
okay, got it. Okay, we could just take out the hyphen.
Okay, yeah.
Alright, thank
okay.
you. Yeah. That's all for me.
Okay. What's her comment, Millie? In case you're waiting.
Right, no additional comments in the minutes from me. Vicki, I guess over to you to get the minutes approved.
Okay. Anyone want to move to approve the minutes?
Also moved.
Thank you. Anyone second?
I'll second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Thanks, Millie, for getting us started. Thanks everybody for being here. We have a phone. Okay, so the first thing up is the annual plan for 2020. Take it away, Jen.
Well, let me say good morning, Madam Chair, members of the advisory board, Director Wells, guests who are here today. I think most of you know me. I'm Ted Trabue, Managing Director of the DC Sustainable Energy Utility. And while we're pulling up the slide presentation that unfortunately was not sent out to you probably until dark 30 this morning, let me just talk about how we'd like to move through this. The annual plan was probably distributed to the advisory board sometime over the last couple of weeks. It is a contract deliverable that annually, about 90 days before we begin the next fiscal year, we submit a plan to you to describe what our activities will be over the next year and what our outlook in various markets will be.
1 second, just to clarify, we'll be sending up the annual plan following, like the actual
Oh,
documents.
okay.
Following the
All right,
presentation.
it hasn't been sent out. All right, so good.
We'll be summarizing it.
I'll be summarizing much of this for you as we move through the next bit of time during this presentation. Again, this is a plan that talks about what we will be doing roughly in some of our different programs over the next year. Where's the... I thought it important to start this conversation with an understanding of where we are in this 5-year contract, where we are in terms of achievement of the cumulative goals, particularly that are within the contract, and how that achievement then influences what we will be doing over the next year or so. As you can see from this chart here, which shows you in the blue at the bottom, this is electric on the left, gas savings on the right. Our cumulative target for the 5-year benchmark is up here, this top line. The blue down here represents how far along we are towards the achievement of that cumulative target. This is through the end of May of this year, which is roughly a little bit past the halfway point in the 5-year contract. So as you can see, we're about 55% of the way home on the electric savings, 56% of the way home on the natural gas savings. One could argue that this is precisely where we ought to be at this time in the contract, and I think that that's a fair argument to be made. I think similarly, one might argue that past performance being a possible indicator of how we might perform over the next 2.5, slightly under 2.5 years, would say that a steady hand on the tiller should get us home to achieve these maximum savings that are prescribed in the 5-year contract. I would say, however, I would make, however, an argument to the contrary of that. In my view, the next 2.5 years will probably be quite dissimilar to what happened in the first 2.5 years in some respects. And some of the things that happened in the first 2.5 years may repeat themselves over the next 2.5 years. And therefore, anything other than business as usual, I think, will be required to make sure that we hit these goals as they are stated in the contract. Let me be a little bit more specific and not talk, at what I call the meta level. We started this contract in October of 2017. It wasn't as if we just came into existence at that point. There were things that happened in the prior year or so that greatly influenced how we actually started our work in October of 2017. For those of you who were here, most of the people on this side of the room and just about everybody over here, you know that we came through a very competitive solicitation to actually win the award for this contract. That competitive solicitation had its impacts on our staff internally. I would say 30 to 40% of the staff left, going through the tumult that resulted in the award of the contract. We had to rebuild the staff. Similarly, right now, we're going through an effort to rebuild the staff. We've lost one engineer. I'm talking about the engineering staff in particular. We lost one engineer. Taking a move somewhere. Another engineer is going to grad school. A third engineer is taking a leave of absence or is leaving to go and do something else. We're rebuilding the engineering team. We clearly have some challenges there, but we had to rebuild the staff. More importantly, though, you've got new codes coming online. We'll speak to those in a second, and we speak to them in the annual plan. You have the omnibus energy legislation that will offer Washington Gas and Pepco the opportunity to run energy efficiency programs. Many of you are working on the working groups that are helping to establish, what will actually happen. We have the lighting cliff that we have talked about extensively coming on in FY21, but still it'll impact what we do in FY20. So things will not be business as usual. Things will actually be changing a bit in the next fiscal year. And so without further ado, we'll kind of get into some of those things that we think we're going to need to change and some of the things that will stay the same. Again,
Excuse me, could you just clarify what you meant by lighting cliff?
Sure. For residential lighting, LED lighting will become code as of January of 21. So our ability to claim savings only allows us to claim measures that are above code. So a lot of the lighting programs that we're running right now, particularly on the residential level, we'll have to find substitutes for them. And I'm going to have Patty come up and talk a couple of slides later about some of the programs that we're running. We're going to have savings coming from other areas to make up for the savings that we will not be able to achieve through the lighting program. Is that?
It did. I just wasn't familiar with cliff, but
We call it the lighting. In the industry, we call it the lighting cliff.
Okay.
When
thanks.
Can't incentivize lighting like that.
But
Strong performance through the first half of the 5 years of the contract has put us in a good position. The renewable target for 5 megawatts over 5 years has basically been hit at this point. That will allow us to move funding into other areas of the contract. What you will not see in this presentation today is a discussion of our Solar for All program. Solar for All program is roughly a third of our overall contract. We're going to reserve that conversation for the next meeting of the advisory board. And the Solar for All contract, Solar for All work that we're doing, again, really doesn't contribute to these 5-year goals, but I know that it's an important part of what we do, so we wanted to reserve a separate conversation with the advisory board to talk about solar for all. But in our first 5-year contract, we had a solar or a renewable generating goal of 5 megawatts over 5 years. So we've already hit that. So we don't need to incentivize any more solar through our base Sustainable Energy Trust Fund money. Again, this allows us to move money into other programs. What we really also want to do is something, Madam Chair, that you were talking about a couple of minutes ago when we were discussing the minutes. In the low income impact, where we have that low income goal of roughly 10% of our savings coming in the low income community, that's one where we have not achieved the maximum performance benchmark in the first, either of the first 2 years of the contract. We want to make sure that, hopefully we'll hit that this year, we want to make sure that we hit that in the following 2 years as well. Even though that's an annual goal, we want to make sure that we're achieving that maximum benchmark there as well. The Clean Energy Omnibus Bill, as I said, has 2 major components to it. I'll mention a third in a minute before we leave this slide. The Energy Efficiency Working Group, where I know a number of you are participating. Sean, you're participating. I think you made a presentation last week when we met. Dr. Cooper and her team are participating. Chairman Corman, I know you are as well. So we are working with the Public Service Commission. We'll officially call a working group to order sometime after the not the first of the year, the beginning of the fiscal year, I should say. But we've been meeting informally to kind of get our thoughts together around that. The Building Energy Performance Standards Task Force, I think Director Wells, you kicked off a meeting of that group last month at some point. So there are discussions going on there about how some of our larger buildings are going to probably need to upgrade their facilities, improve their efficiency. And so we're thinking about how we participate in this, what comes out of those working groups. And then the Omnibus Bill also roughly doubles the surcharge for the Sustainable Energy Trust Fund. So there are new resources that are available, maybe not necessarily to the DCSU, but there are new resources available in the energy efficiency space. I should not move too much further and say that the Green Bank also gets some funding out of those additional resources that are available. Director Wells, maybe you can give a better synopsis than I did. When the Green Bank might be coming online and start to offer some of its offerings and programs.
Well, the board's meeting has been established and approved by council. So I think over the next 6 months, the main thing that's going to happen is just they're going to come to life. You're going to have the board. They're going to have to establish a bank account. They're going to establish some parameters around the products that they're going to put out. Over the next 6 months, it's really just creating the entity. And Dr. Lawrence, I think we have do we currently have $7 million for them? So we've got money for them. They're just coming to life.
Right.
Now, I think the greater challenge, and you don't have to go into it now, but the greater challenge where the board here needs to help us think through is how all this works together.
Right.
And that's what the council, other stakeholders want to know. So we've got PACE financing, we've got Green Bank coming online, we've got the SCU, then we have a substantial amount of solar funds to deploy, both through the SCU and elsewhere government. And then we have these funds at the Public Service Commission that will be deployed at least on weatherization for low-income residents, I think, is what the words were.
Well, not exactly, but it could happen that way.
I can't remember the criteria, but that's another 11 million over there. And so advice or thoughts from the board of how this works together. And then, of course, we've got Pepco coming on board with their energy efficiency investments.
Right.
And so how all that works together, and then obviously we have Washington Gas with their work. But how all that works together is not known. It can either happen by luck and happenstance or accident. One of the things we're looking at is that there are different things in different states, but there's a concept called an accelerator. An accelerator means one thing in New York City versus what it means in Seattle. But currently, my vision is that this facilitation happens through DOEE. Until someone comes up with a better model of why that should be outsourced, that facilitation of how all those tools in the tool belt will work together and helping build equity stacks with set goals and such for new buildings and major retrofits will be owned by DOEE until we see a better model. The last thing I'll throw out is that we have out on the street, and an award is about to be made. We're creating, I don't know what we're calling it lately, but the Building Resources Hub. And the Building Resources Hub is to provide the expertise, support, and training for developers and building owners to meet the building energy performance standards, and also once you build to a standard, how to keep that standard. And I know SCU will be involved in it as well. So how all this works together, who's the conductor of the symphony, is a work in progress.
Can I just ask a quick question on that? So the SBU's benchmarks are in legislation and then translated into contract. The omnibus legislation with what Pepco and Washington Gas will be doing will be under the auspices of the PSC and criteria it will set. What body governs Green Bank?
Itself. It's its own separate entity.
It's independent
Okay.
authority created by the
Madam Chair, I think as you can see, the picture that I'm trying to paint, maybe not very artfully here, is that a landscape that has been ours in terms of energy efficiency, ours meaning the SEUs, alone probably for about the last 8 years, is about to change dramatically over the next year. I think Director Wells laid it out very well in terms of the new entities, the new forces that are going to come into being over the next 12 months, maybe a little bit longer. But all of these things are factors and forces that we have to think about, we have to consider as we not only drafted this plan, but try to figure out how we get through the next 2.5 years of this contract.
But also, everything's on the table. I mean, other than what's prescribed in law and by contract. I mean, already the SCU is at times getting up to 50% increase in the funds to deploy solar, even though the contract says you have this for these deliverables. The SCU is best positioned to deploy some of our solar money. It may be that the SCU has some other expertise and roles that, like, I don't know, Dr. Lawrence and I haven't talked about this too much, but if we decide to fund energy audits, for example, for Class B and C buildings that are affordable multifamily housing, it may be that the SCU has the best base to build from to either contract that out with subs or do it themselves. I don't know. The SCU's developed capacity that could be key in that, will be key in that whole world. And so the challenge will be the tension between the SCU being entrepreneurial in this world and keeping the board with them as they decide or not decide to expand what they do.
Is the challenge translating that into benchmarks?
I think the contract is a solid piece that should stay as it is. but it's like Ted said, he's not going over another major piece of their work. He'll do that on another day, which is the deployment of about 10 million a year in solar. That is not tied to his benchmarks at all. SEU could become more of a department store rather than having one department. It potentially, I can't speak for the SEU of how entrepreneurial it would be, BEIC, but it's a world of opportunity. Now, the board needs to stay with them, but not everything will be translated through benchmarks.
So that was the question. So the issue is, I think what you're saying in terms of the board being on board with the SEU being more entrepreneurial means contentment perhaps with priorities being outside the benchmarks as well as achieving benchmarks, or there's a different role for benchmarks in terms of if there's a whole
Helping to
potpourri
guide
of
the
what.
SEU in this new world. I mean, as Ted says, it's a brand new world out there. The board has a role, I believe. You guys have to decide whether you agree, but I think you have a role beyond the four corners of the contract.
Okay. Sorry it's taking so long to make the first point on the slide. I'll speed it up a little bit.
Can't shut 'em up.
I mentioned briefly earlier, but and we don't have the exact timing on some of these things, but there are codes that are under consideration right now that we expect to be adopted at some point during fiscal year 20, which will clearly impact how we are delivering services, particularly to some of our new construction projects. So that's one that we will pay close attention to. And then I mentioned earlier the lighting clip, the federal lighting standards in 2021. So in 20, specifically to talk about that, and Ben is our marketing director and has been now for 7 years or so, we're going to do extensive education and outreach to our residential customers, basically letting them know FY20 is going to be the last year when we're going to be heavily incentivizing LED light bulbs for residents, and we really want to make sure that everybody that can possibly convert over does that conversion in the next fiscal year. We will do that. Through the first quarter of the fiscal year, though, we expect to keep our incentives on other products like HVAC residential products, appliances and things like that. We expect those incentives to remain the same for the first quarter. We will revisit those at the end of as I said, about the end of the calendar year to see how those products are moving. But on the lighting spectrum, we really want to make sure that we're taking advantage of this last year of being able to incentivize residential lighting. As I said, we're going to hold solar for next month. On the leveraging side, we've been doing, I don't want to characterize how we've been doing. We've been leveraging. I think Angela sent a note over to Dr. Lomp this morning. We have some more money that's come in from our continuous bid into the PJM market. That's been going well. For those of you who were around in the earlier days of this contract, you remember how we, because we had a year-to-year contract, that's one of the things we couldn't do under a year-to-year contract. This 5-year contract clearly allows for us to do some leveraging there, and so that's been going well. We have a crowdfunding, I think our first real crowdfunding, Ben, when is that going out? When was that first one?
July 15th.
Okay.
It's actually been
Can you talk a little bit about that to tell the advisory board exactly what we're doing there? And
Sure, I'll start off with Karen.
It's very exciting. This is something new for us. We're actually starting it this year, but I did throw it in the FY20 plans because we hope to do more of it in 20.
So we'll be working with our leveraging team probably on a quarterly basis to fund mostly nonprofits, could be shelters, clinics, anything of that nature that serve district residents and particularly serve the most vulnerable district residents who are either embarking on a project that involves energy efficiency or helping them discover opportunities to save, and then partnering with them fundraising opportunities for those energy efficiency projects. That could be partnering with a lot of the relationships, leveraging the relationships we have with lighting manufacturers and other manufacturers and vendors to see if they'll donate equipment or make donations, and then seeking out just general donations for the projects. And I'll let Karen talk about the one that's launching on July.
Yes, our first one is with Be Safe, which is a nonprofit that helps victims of domestic violence in the area. They're building a new shelter in December that's opening up December 2020, and we're hoping to raise about $45,000 to help fund their energy efficiency products. And if we are able to fully fund their energy efficiency products, they will be able to save about $23,000 in energy bill for their first year. That's money that they can put back into their mission to help more domestic violence survivors. So it's a really cool project, and we're really looking forward to helping them raise money for this.
And that 45,000 is actually in addition to what the DCSC are contributing towards the projects from our
And Director Wells, I'd be remiss in not thanking your staff for helping us shape the press release and everything. It'll go out as we try to solicit funds here in the community. So we'll thank you folks for that, particularly Julia for helping us out in this endeavor. Oh, Mike, thank you, Mike. I didn't, but thank you as well.
Next year.
Hmm?
Next year.
Oh, no, thank you guys. Okay. Aspect leveraging, I think, is something we probably started as an offering this year, where we're working with DC Sun. I think is the first organization with whom we're working to help them expand and do more single-family, low-income solar projects. We will expand that to many more contractors in FY20, so that's something where we'll see that scaling up as well. And if, again, next week we can dive into this deeply, because I know we're just touching the surface of it today, but we can dive into that pretty deep next week. On the innovative side, I want to invite Patty Boyd to come on up here and talk more a little bit about some of the things that we probably started doing over the last 18 months that are really, or more, coming to fruition now. Again, some of the things that the 5-year contract kind of allows you to do. Come on. And I'll let Patty talk about some of the things that you'll be seeing in FY20.
Great. Well, thanks.
And I should congratulate the newlywed. Let's see this. You got married over the 4th of July.
Thank you. Thank you.
You step on a burned out light bulb now. And
Right. I didn't do that, but
we're gonna next meeting is a Jewish wedding.
Perfect. All right. So thanks for having me here to talk about this. I know I've talked about several of these things in front of you previously, but I'll just summarize them again. Pay for performance was kind of an innovation type thing that we were able to better roll out with a 5-year contract. It was very hard to incentivize people for things happening in the future when we didn't know if we were going to be here in the future. And now that we know, we're able to build long-term relationships and look at pre-baseline energy data compared to post-energy data after something has occurred, either a multi-measures or operation changes. It could be a lot of equipment changes at the same time as they're upgrading their building automation system, and so they're able to control more things better. There's a bunch of projects that fit into pay for performance, and up until FY19, we didn't really call any of the projects pay for performance, but in FY19 we are now calling them that. And the big focus this year is to build or establish or continue to establish relationships with EMIS vendors, mostly the energy management information systems. Yeah, so the likes of AtSite, Aquacor, Mach, even Siemens, that really focus on the building operation. They're bang for the buck. You can now with the cost of monitoring equipment relatively really decreasing compared to 2 years ago or 3 years ago or 4 years ago, you're better able to see what's going on in your building and make changes based on that. So we've been working a lot with them, and a lot of the largest energy users, maybe where basketball games are played, or you know, a lot of them are working with these vendors as well to better manage their systems, and we've been enrolling them, and these are projects in our system. And so that is going on, and I see in FY20 projects, a lot more projects being closed, and the relationships really being established. In terms of, excuse me, attribution, we've been claiming energy savings for building operator certification training for 2 years. FY16? No, it wouldn't have been starting in 17, where we sponsor. We've had a lot of people from GSA, from DGS, from a lot of the large management companies taking building operator certification training, sponsored by the DCSU, hosted at the DCSU site. And once they finish the training, we are able to claim energy savings, and it's a TRM measures, like the technical resource. It's just a deemed savings based on the square footage that the person manages. This year, and actually right now, maybe this week, maybe next week, we've been working together with IMT on code compliance efforts and helping Dave Epley with the Green Building Division since 2014 when it was established. Maybe it was 2013 it was established. Since 2014, DCSU has been helping to support the Green Building Division's code compliance, energy code compliance efforts. And we've done a lot of work with that, trainings for the market, trainings for developers, code interpretations. So if the code says something and a developer is building something and the code doesn't exactly apply to what they're doing, they go to the DCRA and say, you know, that doesn't apply. So we have been funding code interpretations to get people to comply with the code. With the new code coming out, and I'm not sure, maybe somebody has an update on when that might be happening.
I know exactly.
Yeah, we were involved with the TAG group that helped create that the new code, and we plan to, once it is adopted, continue with code compliance efforts through trainings and anything else we can to help those comply with the code. And so we created a program implementation plan to try to claim savings for the work that we've done in FY17 and FY18, or we're only going to claim savings for 17 and 18, even though we started the work in 2014 for the compliance efforts. And we've been working very closely with NMR, who has approved our methodology, and they had one more question they came back with last week, and I just came back yesterday, so I'll be working on that this week to try to flush out the final and claim energy savings for that. The next thing is net zero with DCRA. That's a true innovation idea that working again with Dave Epley, as you may or may not know, the code is going to require, or the omnibus bill requires that residential buildings, new construction, must be built to net zero 2022, starting in 2022, which is, you know, a very, very shortly coming. And commercial buildings are 2026. Helping to transform the market to get them to be ready to support that is really important. And so working with Dave Epley right now, we were able to promise, and Lance and Teresa approved this, up to $10,000 per residential site, up to $100,000 in FY19. And I don't know if we're going to get there just because of the paperwork that needs to happen. To make that happen, I'm working on the MOU right now, just between DC, SEU,
So
and
it's probably
DCR.
20.
It'll probably happen in 2020. But to try to get at the time of permit issuance, when they've designed to net zero, to try to bring the market along to get people in place that know how to install the equipment that's required to get net zero, we are going to be providing that. And
Excuse me, could you clarify that a little bit for me?
yeah.
So, are you suggesting that you're going to have a contract or a relationship with DCRA in some fashion that you will be performing that, I guess it would be an education function or outreach function with builders, contractors, et cetera?
So there's a lot happening there. So our account managers are always out talking to the market, and there's several projects right now that are ready to enroll into this effort. Either they've contacted Dave Epley and they've come to us for assistance, or we've told them to go to Dave Epley. So there's a couple things that are happening. the Green Building Division will be hand-holding, basically, to try to get permit expediting. In addition to working not as the permit agency saying you're doing something wrong, but as the permit agency saying, hey, do it, try to do it this way, and working very closely with them to try to get this to happen. We will be providing a financial incentive to offset the cost of purchasing the ERV that's required, the heat pumps that are required, the building simulation that is required. There's extra costs that go along with striving towards net zero, right?
Okay.
And so we have an MOU with DCRA that we already have, and I'm just trying to add language to add this effort into that. And then they will have a partnership agreement. The customer will have a partnership agreement with DCRA saying, yes, we promise to do these things. The partnership agreement then says, you're also able to work with DCSEU through a separate agreement and incentive agreement, like we normally do, to get funding from DCSEU. So it's kind of, there's several documents that need to be in place to make this happen. And I'm trying to work on all of those right now.
No, I understand. I just wanted to be clear about that this is not a DCRA funded activity.
No. This is DCSU helping to support market transformation.
Correct.
Early.
All right. Just one other clarification. So the net zero initiative, or however you refer to it, that is different or separate from LEED certification process?
Separately, yeah. And residential LEED, do they have residential LEED? I don't know. And so we're focusing on residential first, but there might be a small commercial in there, like a grocery store or something. That
residential being multi-tenant?
No.
Oh.
Single family townhomes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, very good.
And in addition to that, we're also working on, as a whole, DCSEU, how to support this net zero effort overall. And so we're researching best practices. Possibly there's something called performance-based procurement. We're trying to figure out the best way to support everything moving towards net zero, however we can. And that's all I have.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Our last slide, as you all know, because it's so near and dear to my heart, is our workforce development efforts. We plan to do about 2 cohorts next year. Each cohort has roughly 10 students in them, and they last for 5 months. These are paid externships where the students are actually working on site out in, today they're working with Council of Governments, Howard University, sometimes some of the hospitals. Is one over DCRA right now, or did they? Greenscape, yeah, what some of our direct installation contractors, they're working there, and after 5 months, hopefully the contractor will be able to pick them up. We have to spread the contractor base that we're using next year, so we'll be looking for new contractors and mentors to participate with us next year. We're very happy to say that BB&T Bank has signed on as one of the sponsors of this program, both financially and by giving us staff to come and do financial literacy training for the trainees. And so BB&T Bank has been working with us, and we really want to give a shout out to them about their sponsorship. One of the things that we're also trying to do with this program next year, which is very different than what we've done in years past, over the last few years, the students have come either out of college or through maybe some staffing agencies. We try to establish some direct relationships with high schools here in the District of Columbia so that we can take students directly out of the high schools and feed them into some of these programs where they'll be learning about the environment, learning about energy efficiency or renewables, and then moving directly into the world of work. And so that's one of the new efforts that we're going to try to fold into this program in FY20. With that, Madam Chair and members of the board, that concludes our presentation this morning. Oh, I'm sorry. This is our budget. Roughly as we have it laid out right now for FY20. Again, this does not include as Director Wells mentioned, about $10 million a year for solar. Again, that discussion will happen next month. This is the Sustainable Energy Trust Fund budget, with which roughly we think we'll be working with next year.
Sorry, you said it doesn't include solar.
This does not.
Right.
Right. I said that's next month's discussion. The solar budget would add roughly about $10 million to this. One of the programs that we ran this year that we would not anticipate running next year, has been a discussion about running it next year, is the Emergency Heating and Air Conditioning Replacement Program. That's a program this year where we had about $1.4 million for emergency furnace and heating replacement. You'll remember some of those discussions with Chairman Kane, in fact, as we got that program set up. That program has been running very successfully this year. We anticipate spending just about all of the money, but there haven't been discussions about running that next year. That would have been another $1.4 million or so added to this.
All right. Just one clarification to go back to the last presentation we had regarding the innovation program. So that means that you've got $200,000 that is budgeted for all three of these innovation projects that were just outlined.
It's a draft budget.
I got you. It just seemed to me that off the cuff, that $200,000 for those three initiatives seems rather thin. Right.
The pay for performance has moved into our custom program.
Okay.
That's not.
All right.
That's not part of it. We do also have an innovation project that wasn't on the slide that I didn't mention, of master meter departments.
Oh.
And trying to help figure out that behavioral component.
Okay.
And so together, that the master metered one and the net zero one together would be about that, but we're still working on finalizing.
All right.
Could you restate that behavior program? I couldn't quite hear.
Sure. We have right now with
Hey, come closer, please.
with I believe it's with NHT. We're working with them on one of their low-income properties, installing meters in a master metered building at each one of the individual sites. And NHT is really progressive in this area, and they're trying to find a way to share any savings, the dollars from energy savings, with the residents in the building. And so we're working on that. It's taking a little bit longer than we thought it would, but it's in an effort to try to solve the split incentive issue. Yeah.
Sub-meters? Like
Yeah.
sub-metering?
That little, yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay. Again, as you can see, we are more than halfway to achieving the energy targets that are in the 5-year contract. We've basically fully achieved the renewable energy target that's in the 5-year contract. But the landscape is changing very rapidly and will continue to change in significant ways over the next 18 to 24 months. So this is a snapshot of where we are today. I want to thank the members of the board who have been working with us in some of these, kind of loosely knit task forces that we've been working on over the summer. And we look forward to working with you in 20 and 21 as we land this ship. Hopefully very successfully. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So the report is up for discussion next, and I think that the prior discussion that we just had really helped to put some of it in perspective, at least what our executive summary and our conclusions may be in the report. First, I'll ask, do we now, we have a kickoff date for our 3-month clock?
Yes.
And that was, okay, 30 days or 90 days before October 1st, which is right there on the line. And I know last time, was there any discussion of any schedule or people signing up for particular sections?
Yes, Millie began that discussion. I think something was going to be sent around to see if folks wanted to replicate the system that was used for each of the sections. But I think Millie can provide an update as to who actually signed up to draft what. But she started that discussion last time.
All right. Millie, are you on? She had to step away for a phone call. So maybe we'll switch for a moment on that. I have a list. I mean, I don't know if anybody ended up signing up or not, but it seemed to me like, given everything that's going on, so we do have board members in 2 simultaneous activities in addition to this board. One is the benchmark subcommittee that has been formulated to look at the task that came out of last year's annual report, which was to examine benchmarks, see if they still work. I'll come back to that in a second. And then the second is the participation in this working group that is exploring the coordination between SCU, Washington Gas, and PEPCO for purposes of the omnibus bill and PSC issues. So those are 2 separate issues. Haven't necessarily been involved yet on the Green Bank. I don't know if there's an express SU board role or not, but in any event, I mean, it seems to me like each year we seem to have a theme for our reports, and then we say we don't really need to do a whole lot of 25 pages more text, and then we always have 25 pages more text, which is not a bad thing either, because I mean all the things that we were reporting are also things that people want to know about and that we do want to talk about. So we probably are still going to do that, and we'll be doing them in accordance with the role that I think that we've traditionally filled on that. PEPCO talks about electricity, Washington Gas talks about gas, and Grid Alternatives talks about low income, and no. Yes, thank you. And green jobs. Yeah. So, I'm assuming it'll go along those lines and we can figure that out, but it just seems to me sort of thematically, that we set ourselves up last year because we said, do we think we need to re-examine the benchmarks if they're working? For example, converting peak demand reduction back from where it had been, which was a hard target, to a reporting requirement. Should we go back to a hard target? And that's something
I don't think it was a hard target. It was a target to be achieved, and then we were measured based on achievement. It wasn't like you had to get X number in order to.
I'm sorry, but it was a benchmark, and now it's tracking.
It was a performance benchmark that had a financial incentive or penalty associated
right.
with it.
And
yes,
then it became tracking.
Yes, that's
only.
correct.
So I think the question was just that had been raised was by way of example. Was that something that was working? Should we put it back because now dynamics have changed? Storage is important. That kind of thing could be incentivized by a peak demand reduction target. So leaving aside, whether or not we're going forward with that, what we charted ourselves to do in the last annual report was to look at the benchmarks. I think all of us were saying that the benchmarks have, looking at the benchmarks should have some utility, no pun intended, for these 2 other issues that we're working on as well, which is, for example, if we are all looking at, does it make sense to have a peak demand reduction target? Maybe a conclusion would be it ought not to be on the SCU, and it ought to be something that the SCU advisory board would recommend be considered by the working group that's looking at the PEPCO Washington Gas PSC SCU criteria or benchmarks or goals. So we thought that there was going to be overlapping utility anyway, with obviously the big driver being that the benchmarks were created before the district had such aggressive and explicit goals on reducing carbon footprint, and now it does. And how do we try to mesh what the SEU is doing with what the purposes of the legislation, and what everybody else is doing too, and what's the best way to do that? So I think that we'll be hearing what the benchmark subcommittee is doing, and everybody is looking at that. But then I also hear the added layer or gloss or whatever other chapter or component on the SEU's existence, which is a life potentially outside of benchmarks and contract and the things that the SEU is doing and does well and augmenting or not, and it doesn't necessarily fit the benchmarks. Should it fit in the benchmarks? Should it not fit in the benchmarks? Now be the second piece that the board is looking at, because it's happening. So we ought to be taking advantage again of all the talent around the table to try to assist and the SEU obviously brings value to each of these respective areas that we're focusing on and trying to come up in our wisdom with how. My suspicion is that we're not necessarily going to actually have the recommendations for the annual report as much as trying to frame the issues and figure out what it is that we are going to do in the following year, at least on this part 2 or second piece of the puzzle, in addition to the benchmarks. But all that's by way of intro, I think. I don't know if anybody has any other thoughts or sentiments on any of the above or what the report ought to look like, just generally. Good sign. Okay.
One of the discussions that also occurred that has occurred in other forums at the same time, that we've chewed on, but or at least I've chewed on, but I'm not in a particular place yet, is that the benchmark could be couched in terms of reducing greenhouse gases versus energy reduction. And because the SEU contract is just a piece of a much bigger picture, I think that it makes more sense to keep it as energy reduction, because when we do greenhouse gas inventory, we count everything, that it still gets included in our greenhouse gas inventory, but the more that it's energy reduction, that it keeps the target where it belongs for this piece, because it's only a piece of this whole toolkit to retrofit the city. But open to discussion, but I'm just saying that in terms of the recommendations and how much time you guys put into that, I'm not there in terms of my recommendation that I get couched into greenhouse gas reduction. But that doesn't mean, I'm not the boss. I'm an ex officio member of the board, but I'm just saying that we are discussing that, and I don't think we need it for. I think it diverts in some ways the strength of this contract if it changes.
So I guess maybe a question that has come up has been whether or not, because it's a little bit, I don't know, chicken and egg. The greenhouse gas inventory includes, or it encourages energy savings. There's a piece of that as part of the greenhouse gas inventory, and vice versa. The energy savings has a translator into greenhouse gas reduction, and that is one of the benefits or accomplishments that's tracked every year. So I think some of the questions that arose were maybe more mechanical as to whether or not the particular metrics being used for translating it into greenhouse gas reductions were the correct ones. That was a sort of subsidiary.
Well, the way
we do use the same methodology that the district uses for overall greenhouse gas calculation.
Can I ask a clarifying question, Tony? Pardon me for not being intimately familiar with the inventory that your department's been doing for greenhouse gas emission reduction. But do you, or does your staff account for emissions that occur within the district? Or do you also account for emissions that occur outside the district that are reduced as a result of actions that are taken in the district?
Yes.
Okay. So you do the latter, not the former, or do you do both?
When we look at it, we say that 74 to 75% of all greenhouse gases that are caused by activities in the district,
okay. So that includes the indirect,
is related to our building energy, the energy consumed by buildings.
Okay.
But then when we talk about 24% or 20 or so, 26% of greenhouse gases in the district is caused by vehicles, income or internal combustion engine vehicles or other vehicles, and that's only captured inside the district.
Okay.
So it captures both.
All right. Because what I was really thinking about on energy efficiency, because the energy is, for the most part, generated outside of the district.
Right.
It's drawing a one-for-one comparison, saying energy efficiency within the district reduces greenhouse gas emissions in Maryland, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, wherever the electrons may be coming from. Only a certain percentage of those are coming as a result of burning fuel. Some of them, of course, are coming from renewable sources. So the calculation gets a bit, should I say, complex.
Right. We when it's released, you'll see we've got a report coming out, but we follow a standard that is prescribed by C40 in Bloomberg, so that all the cities are measured in the same way, and it's fairly rigorously comprehensive, but it captures both. And I don't know how deep to get into it, but part of the reason that I'm not excited about the benchmark in greenhouse gas reduction is because I don't know how deep we get into fuel switching, that kind of stuff, for the SEU. I think that being focused on energy reduction. I mean, Lance, you want to say anything else about that?
Yeah, if you change the benchmark to GHG, it does incentivize a lot of fuel switching depending on what metric you're using within that GHG. For example, if we're talking about CO2 equivalents, which is pretty much the standard measure people use for measuring GHG, then it would really allow the DCSCU to probably concentrate more on doing electric fuels or on gas fuels, depending on that conversion factor that they're using. But I support the director's view in the sense that at the end of the day, we're still coming back to essentially what we're doing right now, is improving efficiency through gas and electric reductions. And then those numbers are translated into GHG reductions. So even if you set a GHG target, you're still starting from where you are right now to get to the target. So I'm there in the sense that we already report out the GHG contributions the DCSU work has to the district's overall goal. It is counted as part of that calculation. So setting a separate GHG target for the SEU apart from the district overall goals, I'm not sure how beneficial that will be for the folks involved. Because for the most part, customers understand reductions in electricity, reductions in natural gas consumption. You start telling folks in the public about reductions in GHG, then you have to spend a lot of time connecting those dots for them to understand, well, if I improve the efficiency of my home, what does it really mean for the environment from a GHG standpoint? More so the immediate communications about benefits on the financial side from reductions in their bill, and then we can talk about how it helps the environment.
I think to your question about what you're asking for, the difference between what we call site and source emissions is essentially that. I mean, the Department of Energy and like Energy Star measures it on a source basis. So you're always measuring at the site, like what the mix of electricity and gas or other fuel use. And then there's like essentially an adder with for electricity, what's the source generation of it? Is it a mix of nuclear, coal, and natural gas? What's that emission factor from the eGrid numbers? And then from natural gas, there's an adder for essentially the upstream source and any line losses or anything else that happens in the processing or drying of the gas. So two different methodologies for gas and electric in that scenario.
This is Donna. I just had a general comment on what Lance shared about the education component regarding green gas type emissions versus general reductions around electric and gas usage from an energy efficiency perspective and the savings that are resulting from that. And just a recommendation as this does evolve, just utilizing this still yet as an opportunity to educate from from that perspective when we start talking about things such as climate change. So being able to advance that and messaging it appropriately as the SBU does move forward, as well as the efforts of PESCO, as well as Washington Gas and the other entities to take that as an opportunity to educate individuals who are taking on those particular actions, but how it does translate from a climate protection perspective as well.
So I think
so not negating it, but using it as an opportunity where it may not be that dominant driver from a messaging and a communication perspective, but it is a subset or an equivalent of to help educate.
So I think all these points are very important. I don't know that they could be concluded today or resolved, because I know there were a lot of, like, people put the whole question of should we be encouraging fuel switching on the meeting last month. I wasn't here, so I don't know what the, gestalt was in the room, or yay or nay, or where it was. I know that there have been discussions by the SEU over the years on this. By the SEU and the advisory board over the years. But so I think these discussions in terms of what or how will occur under the auspices of the working group and some of the folks who were involved with that. I know that I remember some discussion from a couple of months back, so if I'm getting the terminology inaccurately, I apologize, but about the methodology that was used. There was something about, in the contract, whether or not there was something in the contract having to do with the GHG reductions, GHG emissions reductions, and it was like a multiplier or a figure that I think there was a question about, but I'm not prepared to talk about that today. So in terms of like,
I think it's important to Nina Dodge, and I don't want to track it.
Yeah, but then this other question about the particular contract multiplier, I know there was an issue, so I think there's sort of the, the big picture is whether we would abandon the energy savings metric and go for GHG reduction, and then there may be subsidiary questions instead, and I think those are all things that, folks should discuss in addition to the yay or nay on encouraging.
Well, I'm just saying that as you go into looking at the benchmarks and such for doing your final report and recommendations, I think it's a great question. I'm currently, in terms of the SEU contract, I'm not there.
Yeah.
Or I have not been convinced.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean you're not convinced, but you're saying
right. Yeah. No, and that's fair, and I think it's a fair kicking off point for the working group to say, well, hearing that, is that something that, people want to go to the math, or not go to the math? It's a recommendation, and people can do with the recommendation what they want with the recommendation as well. Or, is it our obligation to vet it, think about it in light of new legislation, and or discard it? Yeah.
There's a lot of expertise around the table.
Yeah.
So I don't presume to be the final say, and I can be convinced otherwise. I'm open.
Yeah.
It's just in terms of doing our internal review and talking to my team, not there for this contract. I am there for the total.
Is there other information that the team generated that would be beneficial to the board?
I don't think so. It's more perspective of what's the value of this contract in terms of what we get out of it. What we get out of it is it's not the big picture. This contract's not doing everything. We've got all those other pieces. This particular contract, we focus on energy savings, is it's working.
Well, and I think hearing a perspective of what does the customer translate that into in advancing the district's objectives is a very important metric that we shouldn't be losing. And if the metric is how much do I save on my energy bill, not how much am I reducing the district's footprint. That's an important thing to keep in mind. So I think it's valuable, and thank you. Did we end up, and I know Millie, Millie, are you back with any sort of a schedule for the benchmark subcommittee? Because I think that we were saying it wouldn't be done with its work until November, but our report is due in October.
Right, we don't have a formal schedule, so that's one of the things we were hoping with all of these subcommittees to get something sort of formalized We just had that first discussion last time that Nina led on the whole greenhouse gas reduction issue, but just to see like what comes next and how that comports with the other subcommittees that have been flagged for development with regard to lifetime energy savings and peak demand. For example, for the lifetime energy savings, I know the board had been waiting for the report, the paper that Patty has been developing that I think will be ready in the next month or so to help, with that perspective. So
I'm not sure Patty's paper was focusing on lifetime energy savings. Patty was looking at something different related to the non-energy benefits.
Non-energy benefits.
And the others.
Yeah.
That's different from lifetime energy savings.
Okay,
The
so
two things we're going to very shortly are non-energy benefit, a health increase in the health
Right.
energy benefit adder, and potential new low income non-energy benefit adder.
okay, so whichever, as part of the conversation, I know just generally that the board had been earnestly waiting for that perspective that Pat has been developing. So just to see how that
So that's a
folds
benefit.
into the whole question on either in any area or not. Maybe it'll just be something on the agenda for next time.
Well, what are we doing in terms of trying to develop answers or to develop research? So we have the paper that Patty's been working on non-energy benefits, and we don't really have non-energy benefits as a benchmark as a bullet under the benchmark subcommittee.
Right. It wasn't one that was
Hi, this is-
specifically asked for. Sorry.
Hi, this is Adrian. I'm just looking back at my notes from our June 11th meeting, and Millie had brought up us having a technical writer, and so OPC had went ahead and made that motion that we would have a technical writer not to exceed 5K, and we were supposed to get something back this month in terms of where we are on that. And also, we had went ahead and decided that Vicki or Millie would write the executive summary, and that Sean would look at cost effectiveness, and that OPC would look at increasing EE generating capacity. And that's as far as we got in terms of where we were and what we were trying to do. So,
Okay, thanks.
you're welcome.
So let's come back to that in a second. While we just wrap up on the benchmark subcommittee. So for each of these, let's say 4 areas into which we were looking, peak demand, GHG reductions, or fuel switching, lifetime energy savings, are we doing something to get ready for a next meeting? As opposed to just putting them on the agenda and saying, we'll talk about it down the next.
From our perspective, we're really waiting on the board to lead these discussions. We haven't done anything as an agency per se, because it's up to the board members to have the subcommittee meetings. We were willing to organize, we sent out some doodle polls, but this is board-led discussions and board-led research.
Yeah.
So,
It's board-led research?
Well,
did you say no? I thought the board. I thought we discussed it. The board can't do its own research, and we're all volunteers. And so I think that's part of the question, which is that for the board to be fulfilling its role, and we've been gone kind of back and forth on this a lot. We need help. If the answer is there isn't any help, and the board has to generate it itself, then
Well, I wouldn't say there is any help. It's just, to me, and in my own personal opinion, is just lack of clarity of what we should be doing to help the board out. For example, when we talk about peak demand, what should we be doing to help the board make any kind of determination as whether they should become a benchmark or not?
So, I think that we've been talking about this too, which is that, number one, it wouldn't necessarily be interfering. The big question has been, is what we would be doing interfering with what benchmarks there already are, so that we'd be causing disruption with the SEU's 5-year plans. But then the obvious question is having a peak demand reduction target, again, going to advance programs that the SEU would be implementing? Is it something that we think should be considered by another entity, whether it's Green Bank criteria for funding, whether it's PSC criteria for programs that it will evaluate that are proposed by Pepco and Washington Gas. Other jurisdictions have them. So I think that the question that would be helpful for the board to know is tracking doing enough? Is having a target or a goal effective? What have been other jurisdictions' experiences, and how do they translate into SEU programs or not?
Okay, and we can pull up some of the old research that we've done, why we moved away from this being a hard benchmark in the past, because, for example, the SEU does not manage any demand response program. This peak demand benchmark, when it was originally established as a hard target, was merely a function of counting some of the energy savings that the SEU generate through their normal electricity reduction goal, how much of that contributes towards the reductions in peak demand. So it was really just, it's kind of like the GHG goal right now. We're doing a translation of electricity into GHG. It was a translation of your overall electricity savings. How much of that can attribute to peak reduction? So going back to understanding why it should become a benchmark or not would require a number of research to be done. And more importantly, what would be the overall objective? Those are guideposts that we need to be able to make sure that we're bringing the right information to the board. More so than just looking at what other states have been done. Because when we talk about peak demand, for example, are we talking about overall peak demand as it relates to PJM, or just peak demand from Pepco's share of peak demand in the district, or every energy supplier's share of peak demand in the district? There's a long list of things that we can go through.
Meaning for it when it used to be a benchmark.
But when it used to be a benchmark, that's if you read the original contract in the original language, it said the SU didn't have to do anything towards the peak demand benchmark, but merely account for how much of their energy savings contributed to peak demand. So there was no work to be done.
But it was district, in other words, it wasn't PJM. I was trying to answer.
And even to that point, those consultants weren't clear whether we were talking about district-wide peak demand or just Pepco's share of peak demand.
So I think this is part of the discussion when we put these on the agenda. These are some of the things we want to have at the subcommittee level, so that we can start to have the discussion. So I think the first step would be just to schedule the meeting, and we can bring to the table, because one of the things we discussed was explaining how it was structured the last time and what it would mean, not just legislatively but in practice, to have a new goal set up. So I think as a first step, if we could, and I don't believe Lance intended to say the board would do the research, like board directed, more like board directed, let us know what you need, and we bring the resources to bear to support the board. Yes.
Yes, that's exactly what I meant, Bill. I said, because I know you've asked for assistance, but it's like a wide open area. Where do we start with these topics?
But we haven't actually had the discussion.
Okay,
so I think once
just
we get it on the
recap, I don't think anybody got the doodle poll. So I think it was at your suggestion that we merge the next working group subcommittee meeting with this meeting.
Right, to try to get things.
But if what we're doing right now is setting the next meeting, and then having this discussion, then let's just do that.
Right, and do we want to have like 3 separate? Because these are the 3 areas that we had, like peak demand, that have been flagged through the minutes. Lifetime energy, peak demand, and greenhouse gas. So maybe we just set up one subcommittee and just.
I would say set up one, because if some of them just fall off the table, they fall off the table.
Okay.
But also because I am concerned that there was a discussion that the working group would be done with its recommendations in November, but the board report is due in October. So I think that would either lead to an automatic discussion now as to do we just seek an extension now, so we can include those recommendations before we submit something that says we'll supplement them. But in any event, November is not a long time. August is a lost cause, so it really, leaves a couple weeks now, maybe in September and October. So.
Well, for the meeting that's scheduled for August, which is the second Tuesday, should that be, since that's already on the books, rather than trying to schedule through maybe if folks are around, that could be the subcommittee to go through these things. We can just have the August 13th meeting be that.
Well, I'm away, but it's not just positive. But
because waiting until September, which would be
No, I guess I'm saying should there be something more like next week?
next week, okay, sooner than.
Yeah. I would.
We do have some members here and on the phone. Maybe we can just take a pulse right now to say what day next week would work best for some folks, instead of having to go through a doodle poll.
So that's in a week is July 16th, is next Tuesday. 14th is Wednesday. And it can be a call.
And there's already a.
Well, the
working
17th
group
we
meeting
have
on
that.
the 17th.
Yeah.
The other
Yeah.
omnibus one.
So how about the 18th?
What time?
I don't know. I mean, we don't
Morning,
have
afternoon.
Millie on the phone and she's a part of it, but I don't know. Doesn't matter. Let's send that out tentatively.
Okay, we
10 to
say
12.
1. Okay, 10 to 12. I said 1, but 10 to 12.
Okay.
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 10 to 12 on the 18th. No, this is next week.
July 18th.
July 18th.
I have two housekeeping suggestions. I don't know what happened with the doodle poll because I think it looked like it was sent, but nobody got it. Maybe it's just not going through. It didn't go to my junk email or anything. I don't know. And then one other small housekeeping suggestion. I think it would be great to put calling numbers for meetings in the calendar invite because the first place you go to see where I have a meeting and when is your calendar invite as opposed to going through all the emails to try to locate the number or going to the event.
I did see that in your last
Yeah, I
email.
think that's just a
We'll
little-
put it up there in the calendar invite.
Just what, or in the location line here or something.
Yeah.
Just that'll be my big contribution. That'll so going in the annual report. Okay, so that's okay. Then we move to recap of Omnibus Working Group.
Well, I can also provide an update on the technical writer that.
Oh,
Adrian
I'm
mentioned.
sorry. Yeah, and we should do the I'm sorry, as Adrian was mentioning also the distribution of work thus far.
Yeah.
Yes,
So
thank you. And
we
we
were-
should figure out a schedule for that.
We were authorized to move forward with 5 small contracts to do a requisition. So we developed the scope of work, which I put in the folder so that folks can see what we will be procuring. And on the last page in that C.6, the deliverables table, you can see that it's just a short 8-week engagement. We're envisioning 3 drafts. The initial draft wherein the technical writer will compile all of these submissions. So by the time, we don't have them contracted just yet, but we're in that process. So by the time they do come on board, yes, it's right there. They will hopefully be able to receive all of the submissions from the board members and then begin their work to, do the drafts, put it all together with the formatting, editing, proofreading, and the tables and everything else that we usually work through with the board. So that's still in process. Hopefully we should have that contracted soon and we'll be able to have that person working with the board to get the report done by the due date.
Are you looking for any comments on the board on the scope, or?
No,
just
this
putting it
was
out
just,
for
yes, an
comment?
update as to what the
Okay.
requisition, what we're contracting for. C.5 shows what we're wanting, how we're wanting them to work with the board. But it's pretty the standard type of engagement.
But this will still require the board to draft the various sections and provide it to the technical writer, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And I saw something in the minutes about having it done in 30 days.
Right, which happened, that motion was passed June, at the June 9th meeting, but we don't have that done as yet.
I'm sorry, I may have misinterpreted. I thought it was that the board needed to have its report done in 30 days to get it to the first draft to the technical writer. Was that the intent?
Given the schedule, I would say yes, because for all intents and purposes, we have 2 more board meetings scheduled between now and the due date of the report, which is the August 13th meeting and the next one in September. So in order for the board to work with a technical writer and to review what a technical writer is doing, especially if you need to vote on the final draft of the report, maybe that vote can happen sometime in September, but the board will at least need to give the technical writer their sections by, I would say, August 13th meeting, so that the technical writer has a full 4 weeks between meetings to really put together the drafts that can be reviewed.
Yeah, but of course we'll have to electronically always have them. With the board, I think last time the board even voted by email just to say it's fine, but just to give comments back and forth need not be an actual in-person meeting. But once the board is abreast of how the report is being drafted and has been drafted.
Yeah. Well, I guess it's already seeming to me like we should just be asking for November, because I know I'm going away first 2 weeks of August and away now, but people who are drafting pieces are not going to have it done.
Okay, and Mark just stepped up, but we can ask him to let council know.
And then we'll coordinate with the working group subcommittee.
Okay.
Well, unless you think you can take 60 days to write the report, and then within 30 days you can work everything out with the technical writer. Do you want us to wait?
I don't understand the genesis of saying it needed to be done in 30 days to give the technical writer the bulk of the 3-month period.
Well, in terms of going back and forth, like the first 30 days would just be for them to just gather all the information and then start the back and forth with the board. But if that is not necessary, then we don't need that much time.
And just timing-wise, Vicky, if we put out this procurement now, this will have to be completed by September 30th. From the technical writer standpoint. So when you're thinking extension, still keep in mind that the technical writer will need to complete their work by September 30th.
Otherwise, we'll dip into the board's money again next year to have them continue in FY20.
Yeah, I recommend we wait for now for the asking for the extension. You can always ask for it next month. And you probably have them online October 1st. And if you don't get it done by October 31st, you ask for an extension and you work longer with the technical writer.
But not if the technical writer contract needs to bid again.
It would just be kind of not react, but it would just be a new purchase order with new money.
So then it isn't an issue, it ended on September.
Yeah, technically these small procurements, you'll still have to go back through the request for quotes to be able to get it done. We couldn't just extend it from one year to the next. It's not a contract.
Oh, gosh. So I guess it seems like, so.
But just to be clear, is the board drafting the first draft?
Yes. Yes, I mean, yes, so.
Then I don't.
Board members are doing sections.
Then 30 days isn't enough. I mean, something.
Right.
Right. You wanted the writer to do original work. I think it would cost a little bit more. Approved.
Well, October 1st you'll have another.
Okay.
October 1st you get another 9,800 because that's a new fiscal year.
But I mean, to the larger point, I don't think we have to be concerned about like requesting the extension. That can always be done. And what I would not want to do is to request more than one. So if it's 30 days or 60 days, just let council know once this is the amount of time you need. Then, so I think we know more maybe next month on how much of an extension we need.
Well, are there enough people in the room to get a sense of it now, enough of a quorum? Are board members still on the phone? We have 1, 2, 3, 4 board members and voting members at the table. Are Dr. Cooper, Adrian, Sandra.
Yes. Adrian, Sandra Madhu is still listening. I am as well. This is Donna.
Okay, and Millie, are you on? Back on? So do we? 1, 2, 3, 4.
We're at 6.
Yeah. All right. Let's just get a sense of it anyway. Personally, I'm voting for just getting more time now. Just like we're gonna get it together. I might as well rip off the Band-Aid now. That would be my sense of it, and then people can actually organize and maybe set a schedule that they maybe would stick to. We never have before, but maybe we could try now, especially with price tags and other issues. Others have a sense?
So just one one clarification, Vicki, when you talk about additional time, you're requesting additional time for the technical writer. So I'm trying to understand the time frame that you're referencing and who is it applicable to, the board versus the writer, the time in which we actually complete the first draft of the report. So just trying to understand how that tiers out.
I think it would be all of the above. I mean, right, I think we can dash through and see if we can name names to sections of the table of contents from last year and figure out if we still have everybody or every section covered that we need to. But then that would mean everybody draft and then shift to the technical writer and then put it in for, have it final. I think if the board's drafting, which seems to be the logical first step, is the predicate to turning anything over to the contractor, my sense is it's going to be at least 60 days, not 30, which would then move back the time for the technical writer to do their part, which would move back the time for submission of the report. So all of that would be a 30-day extension. So there's a 60-day period now for people to draft their sections over, bearing in mind summer holidays and the like. That's I'm throwing it out there for consideration since there's only 6 votes anyway, so we can't vote, which is fine.
So just one clarification going back to Lance and so how much would this push the timeline on delivering the report and finalizing, voting on it versus when it's due to be delivered, just in general? So how much time will that push it back in terms of our deliverable?
Well, that's essentially what we're talking about here, Donna. How much additional time the board needs for the report? It's really
what I was referencing, Vicki just shared and went through some timelines that she proposed a few minutes ago. And what I'm requesting is based on the information that she just provided with extending those particular dates, how much time does that actually add on to the dates that we will be able to deliver versus the date that is required to be delivered, because she was picking off some modifications to those timelines.
All right,
I believe it's 30 days.
30 days.
I was understanding
She said 30 days.
Yeah.
Yes, so it would be 30 days more on submission, and which would also be the same as 30 days more of technical writer assistance.
Right, because right now we're 10 days.
so we're
into the
talking
90-day
60
time
days
frame.
basically beyond the due date for the report. Because if the report is due at the end of September, and the board is taking 60 days right now to draft their report, and 30 days for the technical writer to do their drafting, and another 30 for review and finalization, we'll need to ask for a 60-day extension.
Right. Yeah, I was just going to comment on that, is that if you're giving the technical writer 30 days, there's got to be an additional period then for other review by the board to ensure that whatever's been stated by the technical writer is in fact accurate and hasn't been changed in some fashion that is not acceptable. So that adds additional 30 days that Nancy just said. So you're really talking about a 60-day extension, like October, November, so we deliver it in December.
Originally, though, we weren't going to have, wasn't it going to be send it to the technical writer, and then the technical writer board review would be at the same time?
Yeah.
So I don't know that it necessarily requires another 30 days board review after the technical writer. So in other words, if it's...
Why don't we work backwards and say that we want a 30-day extension, and that would be the delivery date, so that whatever modifications that are needed to get to that date, we could do.
So that would be November 1.
And then how long were we envisioning a technical writer?
Well, the procurement is 8 weeks, meaning not that they would need a full 30 days just to compile, but like when they get to the extent that they needed to be like tables and graphs and like additional things. Once the board members submit all of their sections, it wouldn't take 30 days just to arrange it and put it into one overall document. Maybe 2 weeks at most, and then that it would go back out to the board for comment, and that kind of iterative process would then happen. So that's why we said maybe 4 to 8 weeks maximum for all of that. But if we're asking for the extension, I would err on the side of just asking for more, and then if it gets in earlier, but I wouldn't go beyond 60 days if, if we could help it.
No.
But,
Okay, that makes sense to me, November 1st.
November 1st
Yeah,
is 30 days.
I agree.
So November 1st
Okay.
is 30 days. December 1st is 60
It's
days.
60.
Oh,
November
I'm sorry.
1st would be a 30-day extension. December 1st would be a 60-day extension. Just ask for
So
that.
you would, starting August 1st, you'll have 2 months to draft and then 2 more months to finalize with the technical writer. essentially.
Right, because right now we're 10 days into the 90-day clock. Because today is July 9th and the report was sent out June 28th. So we're just about 10 days into the 90 days. So it would depend on if we think the board members can do their drafts by, if say August 1. Then the technical writer would then have, to go back and forth, which is doable by September 30. But I'm going to caution in case that first draft, because that's what gets everything going.
Right.
The technical writer.
And I can't assume that the
That's gonna
first draft is
happen.
happening by August 1st.
Yeah.
So if the first draft
Hey, that's 2 weeks,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah.
2.5 weeks.
the first draft were September 1st,
Then we could do a
Then you
push.
could still,
Yeah, we could still
that's
make
the thing,
it.
so it's still 2 months.
so
and that
then
would get us to November 1st.
that would be a 30-day extension.
Yeah.
But I would ask for 60 anyway.
It works for me. I mean, again.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay.
So we asked Mark to reach out and
Okay.
ask for that.
Is everyone comfortable with that, or does anybody have a?
No, I think asking.
Okay.
Okay,
No,
so,
I'm fine, thanks.
so first drafts or the submissions are due, is it September 1?
Yes.
From once we get all this, of the sections assigned, it
Yeah.
should be delivered by September 1 and then the
Yeah. Should I run through them now, or should we do that electronically? What do we have?
Just 20 minutes.
I think we should run through it to see if folks can.
Okay, so I guess I have the table of contents from last year's.
Last question is, since I wasn't around the last time that this was done, can you tell me what portion that Chairman Kane had volunteered to prepare last year?
Yes, I believe, didn't she do the increasing renewable energy generating capacity in the district?
Um,
Well, I think that was what she had done. Increasing energy efficiency of low-income properties was to OPC.
Yes, and we will do that section again this year.
Thank you. Green jobs was grid alternatives. I'm just by elimination,
No,
'cause
that's
I
good.
thought it was increasing renewable energy
Well,
generation.
that makes sense.
Leveraging external funds.
That was like Richard or Scott. It was one of the
Yeah.
folks who had just joined, either Richard Grace or Scott. If Richard is still on, I'm not sure if he remembers the section he wrote.
And the other of the two did innovation.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Reducing growth in peak demand, I think Millie. Tracking, reducing growth in largest energy users. I might have been.
Those are both tracking goals, so you probably can give them to the same person who's doing the tracking goals.
Alright, she's not on the phone, Millie. Societal cost test was Nina. PVP was just a numbers thing. Matter or not matter, so that should be easy. Stats on engagement and outreach. Okay, so the rest I had executive summary, we had going forward. I think Adrian just said that Millie or I were nominated for the executive summary. I'll just suggest I'll do executive summary, Millie do the going forward, which is again, sort of forward conclusion. DOE helped us with board's activities this year, changes to contract. I can send this around. And legislative or other changes that impacted the SEU. I think typically somebody else had done that, but I think, yeah, you guys help with that. natural gas was Washington Gas, and electricity consumption was Pepco, which leaves increasing renewable energy generating capacity that I do believe was Chairman Kane. Because she would look at the reports each year.
Yes, the compliance reports that are filed with the PSC.
Yeah. Okay, great. All right, so then, everybody has their assignment. I'll send it around, but then that means September 1st for that, assuming that we get the.
And I know SCU helped with the leveraging. They submitted some language as to the leveraging activities.
Right.
Yes,
we're
you
happy
did.
to do that.
Okay, great. Yes, thank you.
Or within the other sections of the report where you might want some language from us, we're happy to.
Okay, great. Excellent. Okay, yeah. I think there was CBE requirements, staff and engagement and outreach. Okay, excellent.
Yes, that as well. I see.
Yeah. Okay.
So we're good.
Done.
We might make it, but we'll still request the extension. Once we get it by September 1, I think 4 weeks should be enough for the back and forth, but we'll get the extension anyway.
Okay.
Well, we're asking for 60 days.
60 days extension.
Okay.
Which takes you to December 1st.
Yeah, because we always do well over Thanksgiving.
Let's get it.
Okay. So we're into the Omnibus Working Group recap. And then legislative update.
Right. I did see your email about sending out the invite to the larger board members. I apologize for that because you are correct. The meeting request went mostly to the folks who expressed an interest and want to participate in those meetings. But moving forward, we'll send it out. The next working group meeting is scheduled for next Wednesday. At that meeting, we're intending to discuss long-term and annual.
Wednesday.
Yes, next Wednesday, the 17th, I believe, July 17th, from 1 to 3, right here at DOEE. We'll send out another invite reminder for those who want to participate either by phone or in person. But next week meeting will focus again on long-term and annual saving metrics and performance metrics. We're expecting to have presentations from, the three main bodies involved, the DCSCU, the board, the utilities, and even DOEE would be weighing in on what some of those metrics and goals should look like. So it should be a very good discussion. Thus far, I do have to say, and I really appreciate the folks participating heavily in these discussions. I think they've all been very well attended. We've had some excellent presentations from several entities. I'm also compiling a list of all the presentations and documents that were presented at those meetings. If at any point folks need to get copies, we can circulate that out. I haven't created a Dropbox or anything for them, but folks can understand that if they're at any point wanting to see or hear what was said in those meetings, they can refer back to some of those presentations. With that said, we are still on a 2-week schedule for these meetings.
Yeah, create something and I'll learn how to use it.
Okay. I could do that so that folks can have access
really
to
useful
it.
resources. I want people to spend help, and then maybe you'd be able to recycle them and use them in the next chapter.
Yeah, we can certainly catalog them for folks so they can have access to it. So yeah, last meeting was very well attended. Again, Sean presented on Washington Gas programs that primarily in Maryland and Virginia, and some of their thoughts on what they think they'll be doing here in DC. We also had presentations coming from DOEE and the utilities and, Pepco and DCSU on some gap analysis that we covered. The SCU's gap analysis focused on the larger district energy savings targets and the dollars that we have on the table to try to meet those targets and what would be required to get that done. From Pepco's standpoint, it was more along the lines of some of the existing programs that are being offered, in various jurisdictions and what they see are the opportunities here in the district to either expand or bring new programming into the district from an electricity standpoint. Alex from DOE gave a presentation that really is a synopsis of all three of the entities in terms of the programs that are being offered across Maryland and Virginia and DC, and where we think there are areas for collaboration or where there's complete, areas for opportunities in the sense that neither of the entities involved have been making significant penetrations from a programming standpoint. So next week, we'll start at 1 and we'll send out the presentations from next week as soon as we receive them from the various entities. I'll ask that folks send me their presentations by Monday evening, if possible, so that folks have a chance to digest them before Wednesday's meeting.
And I'm sorry, the presentations are on.
On any thoughts of lifetime lifetime and annual energy savings metrics or any other performance metrics that you think that the utilities programs should be following. So it's a discussion around those topics.
Okay. I mean, I know it's probably not the, I don't know if the place to discuss it or not. I know at the end of the discussion, I raised a question about strengths and weaknesses, like we were looking at gaps, sort of in the, like, yes or no, and whether there was a possibility of looking at the layer of who better, or what, what strength or what particular skill set or staff already, resources do the particular entities have so that the gap filling could be optimal. And somebody said, no, and then the conversation ended. And then I think there was also some discussion of the fact that was done in New York. And I wasn't sure if that would be a topic that would be returned to, or if people thought that would or would not be helpful.
Yeah, and I think maybe I just noted in my own notes, but we can certainly add that to the agenda for the next meeting following, because at that meeting we're intending to talk about new initiatives to meet the identified gaps. And I think you can also bring in a conversation as to who's best suited to be able to implement some of those initiatives when we talk about the strengths and weaknesses. So we can put that in there for the August meeting.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, Mark have to step out to another meeting, so I'll provide the update. The last legislative meeting of the council before they go to recess is today, and they'll go to recess on July 12th and be back in September. The other main update for the board is that
Was there anything relevant?
the only thing is the Green Bank. There's an update on the Green Bank, which
I
is
mean,
that
stay at the legislature.
which is there are 3 appointees to the Green Bank who are on the consent agenda to be voted and approved. That's the thing. That's about it.
I don't know if it's of interest, but there were autonomous vehicle bills. Sort of. Anyway. They were.
Oh, by the way, Mark apologizes. You have to step out.
Other matters?
Yeah, if it's okay with the board, we'd like to make a presentation on the DCSU's FY20 Solar for All program at the next meeting. You may recall several discussions and presentations about their Solar for All. So we want to share some of the FY20 plans with the board, get some input and feedback.
Okay. All right. Anything else?
The next board meeting is August 13th.
Well, I'm not available. I don't know if others should we do it.
I won't be here as well.
Maybe we should try to do a call and see who's on the phone still, and will you be available on August 13th?
This is Donna. I would be available.
I'll be here.
I'm not sure. This is Sandra. Either Adrian or I may be available.
Okay.
And I will be available, Sandra's not.
There goes it.
What?
No, she says, there goes it. So
Yeah.
OPC will be covered.
Okay, thank you. The People's Council never lets the people down.
But
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Vicky.
But you missed the Solar for All. Should we push it to September? Do you want it to be in August specifically?
Yeah, because it's going to require the SU releasing an RFP, and we're trying to get that done pretty much in September. So we wanted to get some input before that September release.
So then I guess we need that.
Or do you want to move the meeting 1 week ahead, like August 7th?
I know it's the other week too, but it doesn't, I don't want it to depend on me. So it's really more, I think, a function of critical mass. Yeah. Yeah.
I don't think we have it at that. Do we have it? The people just roll call?
No, we have 3. Well, how about PSC? 4. Okay, well, we'll find out. Is it a vote matter?
No, it's not a vote. It's again just a briefing, opportunity for comments from the board on how do you intend to go about doing the FY20 solar for all.
Okay, so I guess we'll see if get it on. Yep. Anybody? Anything else? Go
Just
ahead.
a suggestion, I mean, can you do the meeting earlier in September and get the input do the program in September? If you have nobody that's gonna be here, you're not gonna get any advice.
Well, I don't know. It would seriously delay the RFP release. But we're trying to at least get that full 30 day before the end of the fiscal year to be able to get the RFP out.
Well, I guess why don't we see if there's a difference between critical mass the second week or the third week in
Sure.
August. I don't know if it gets worse or better. When's Labor Day?
September 1st or 2nd, I think.
Because I know people who, or when does school start, so often.
Yeah, it starts.
Historically, I think of August
Yeah.
as summer, but it hasn't been still summer in years.
It starts the Tuesday.
No, school starts in August.
Oh, school,
Yeah.
okay, I thought you asked.
Private
Right,
schools.
This is DC public schools.
Yeah, DC
Right.
public schools in Maryland, they start after Labor Day. The Tuesday after Labor Day, so.
I was just trying to figure out when people would do that.
Yeah.
So I don't know the schedule.
Right.
It doesn't affect my schedule.
My son is in 8th grade.
And just one other piece of housekeeping note, we might be doing another contract amendment before the end of the year, and it's straight what we call an administrative function. As Angela and Ted mentioned today, they just brought a check in for $200,000. If the request is to spend it this year, we'll need to modify the contract. All we'd be doing is increasing the budget by $200,000, so wouldn't be changing any other
I could vote on that.
area of the contract.
Sure. Yeah, my vote. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Have good summers.
Thank you.
You want to take a picture?
Yeah, well, I didn't take a picture, so I have a